Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Hayes. I am the global leader for climate change, decarbonisation and nature in KPMG. And I also have a second role where I head up our global renewable energy practice. If there's one issue that has come to dominate my life over the past 12 to 18 months, it is AI and data centres, which, for reasons that will be obvious to everybody in the audience, is a hugely relevant topic, both in the context of the climate agenda, but also in the context of the energy agenda. And I happen to live in Ireland, though I have a global role and I travel the world. But where I live in Ireland, the issue of data centres has become a highly controversial issue. Some of the organisations represented here on the panel are very much represented in this industry. And what we've seen is two things with data centres. One is the sheer challenge of getting renewable power to data centres for lots of reasons that we'll get into this morning. But secondly, challenges from certain parts of society who believe we should not be building data centres. And this is becoming a real concern. I was at Davos, the Davos event in Switzerland, January this year, and this theme suddenly emerged as a really hot topic and a lot of different conversations. And I attended some great sessions with Amazon, Google, and some of the other hyperscalers discussing this issue. And I came away absolutely convinced that we had to do something to change the narrative. The narrative that data centers is somehow bad for climate and energy is very much the prevailing narrative. It is not my view. And this morning we're going to debate some aspects of this, and I'll take you through it in a second. But I became so convinced of this view. I work with WAFA and many others in KPMG. We have commissioned a global report. We've done a global survey of hyperscalers, utilities, developers, investors to find out what they think. And the fundamental questions that we asked are the following. One, is AI a positive for climate action? And the answer, we believe, unequivocally is yes. You need to understand the power of AI, not just in terms of efficiency, which a lot of people talk about, not just in the context of data and data analytics, but when you really think about what AI can do, and we will explore this a little bit in the panel across not just mitigation, but adaptation, circularity, nature and biodiversity, and you weigh that against the additional emissions coming from data centers, you get a very, very different answer. So that is the first part of our thesis, and we in KPMG are not alone in saying this. And I should say, by the way, I don't see them here yet, but we are joined this morning by the US Chamber of Commerce, who are supporting us on this event as well, but I'm sure they're on their way here. But the second position that I will admit is a more of a speculative position. We believe that this exponential demand for energy is actually going to accelerate the energy transition. We are seeing some evidence of this already. We're seeing the growth in geothermal, some biomethane, and in particular nuclear solutions over a number of years. And the hyperscalers, we understand they absolutely need power. We believe that they will take green power if they can get it. The problem we have at the moment is we've got lots of different constraints as we try to scale renewables, and it's a point we'll pick up with Sam during the discussion. But notwithstanding that, if we're going to meet this exponential energy demand, our view is the solution will come from renewables because of the climate benefits, because of cost reasons, but also because renewables we can do anywhere in the world. We're geographically agnostic. These are the positions we've taken. We've done a survey to back it up, but we're not as arrogant to believe that we're necessarily right. This is what the session that WAF is going to moderate a panel discussion to debate these topics. We would love to hear your views. Please challenge us, and we are trying to weave a way forward. One last comment, Wafa, before I'll hand it over to you. Ultimately, when you think through this discussion, you ultimately get very quickly to a discussion on the future of the energy industry. The demand is so huge, and it's a challenge even, I would say, Sam, for the utilities of this world. Are the hyperscalers going to become the utilities? You need to, and I've attended a brilliant SSE event in London a couple of weeks ago with one of the hyperscalers. things are happening on the ground because of the market demand. But I'm very clear about one thing, and this is my final comment. I personally believe, yes, we need regulation, but I personally believe in the power of AI. I think AI is good for society. I think in the same way it took us a number of years to understand the internet, the digital age, what that was about. But I am a passionate believer in the power of AI. We do need to make it work in a positive way for climate, but I think all of the fundamentals are in place. So with that, Wafa, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I mean, just to echo what Mike has said, one of the things from our perspective that we've been thinking about has really been how AI is no longer a growth scenario. It's here, it's staying, and it's also accelerating. So it's about how we make it a part of the solution, how, some of the estimates that are out there is AI can actually help us reduce carbon emissions by 3.5 to 5 gigatons a year. How do we accelerate that? How do we ensure that is happening? As a part of the report that we've done that Mike mentioned, about more than 95% of executives believe that AI can be delivered through green energy. And I don't just say that, or they don't just believe that, it is embedded in facts as well. Because one of the other parts of my job is to look at the Energy Statistical Review that we work with on the Energy Institute. And the key thing that we found there is whilst the energy demand globally is rising by 2%, electricity is actually double that, so by 4%. And renewables globally is rising every year at a record number. Last year was 14%, right? So we are seeing that change. We are seeing that acceleration. It is about how we now embed that into the low carbon economy and how we ensure that not just AI accelerates, but it actually helps accelerate the low carbon emissions as well. So that's why we're here today. And I want to start by thanking the panelists for joining us. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves before we go into the debate. So over to you, João Paulo.
At first, thank you very much. It's an honor for us to be here. My name is João Paulo Oliveira. I'm based in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil. I work for Johnson Controls. I'm Service Director and Digital Solutions Director for Latin America.
Thank you so much. Diana?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Diana Rodriguez. I lead Sustainability Public Policy for Amazon Web Services, based in Washington, D.C., but have coverage primarily focused on the U.S., but also touching on Canada and Latin America. So thanks for the opportunity to pull us together, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Sam?
Hi, everybody. So I'm Sam Peacock. I look after strategy, regulation, corporate affairs for SSE. Our kind of horse in this race, I suppose, is we're big on renewables, building a lot of the offshore wind farms, but we also have an electricity network, so we feel both ends of the data center equation.
Will, giving us the investor perspective.
Hi, everyone. I'm Will Farrell from Federated Hermes. We're a global asset manager with $870 billion in assets under management. And we have a conviction that we're the long-term stewards of that capital. And we also have a separate stewardship business which advises on over $2 trillion of assets.
Right, so you've heard from Mike. So I'm going to dive right in and ask Diana to come in and answer the main question that we're all grappling with in terms of, AI has been termed a climate risk as well as a solution. Where do you think the balance lies?
So I want to answer that question just telling a story about how we think about how we're going to meet the energy demand while remaining committed to our net zero 2040 goal. And they're both extreme challenges. I think meeting the goal that we've set to be net zero by 2040 is a challenge for many of the companies that share that goal, especially in a period of rapid energy demand. But it's something that we're focused on in terms of ensuring that we remain keenly focused on a couple of areas. First, I think as we have a long history of building data centers in the US and globally, we're keenly focused on driving the sustainability of how we build those data centers, from the chips that go into them, investing in lower carbon concrete and steel that go into the construction, and really drive down the carbon intensity of how we're building our infrastructure. I would say, kind of being the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy, we remain committed to that. We have invested in over 250 renewable energy projects in the US, 200 in Europe. We have 2 here in Brazil, and I believe a bit over 80 in Asia. Kind of our decarbonization strategy and our renewable strategy is focused on kind of impacting and driving support and movement towards renewable development in the locations where we operate, but also in some of the countries that have the highest emission intensity in their grids. And I'll point to our investments in renewables and impact in India and places like that. And that's really a commitment that our company kind of drives towards, and I think aligns well with kind of some of the research in your report, showcasing that hyperscalers kind of are driving that sort of investment in renewables. Lastly, I would say, kind of given our position, we also have an opportunity to make early investments in SMR and nuclear technology that we view as one of the critical elements to drive our ability to meet our energy demand, but doing it in a way that is allows us to meet our carbon-free energy goals. So I'll stop there, but
No, thank you for that. I think it's you take that responsibility of what you can actually do as Amazon very seriously in terms of delivering that. So that's really helpful to hear. Sonia, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great chance because now I can ask you a question and also ask you to introduce yourself. So given the work that you've been doing across the globe in renewables and everything that you see, how can governments and businesses better communicate the AI and the AI's climate positive intent that we are seeing and that we are talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So lovely to be here. My name's Sonia Dunlop. I'm the CEO of the Global Solar Council, the Global Solar PV and Battery Storage Industry Association, and also Vice Chair of the Global Renewables Alliance. For us, I think there is a huge amount of potential to use AI in many different ways, but above all, in managing what we call the grid integration process, in managing ever more complex grids with ever, ballooning, exponential growth in the number of generation assets connected to the grid. To give you an example, Pakistan, in the space of 12 months now, has 3 million homes with solar panels on their roofs and injecting some of that excess power into the grid. And really kind of managing the massive complexity of a much more electrified system with a huge amount of distributed generation and with new forms of energy providing those ancillary services, those voltage support, frequency support, black start, reactive power. All of that is now being delivered by electronics, such as battery storage and grid-forming inverters, advanced inverters on that battery storage, rather than by thermal power generation. And that really calls for the use of AI in those central control centers operated by the transmission system operators. There are many other potential applications, but that's the really, really the transformational one from where we sit as the renewables industry.
So that's really helpful because I think we're going to come back to automation versus actually handing over the control from an AI perspective, because there's a massive debate you can have around the ethics, etc. But before we do that, I'm going to turn to you, Zhao. In terms of the work that you see around automation and management of buildings, what are you seeing as the key trends where AI has been really helpful in, whether it's in energy efficiency or driving climate-related propositions? Like, what are you seeing in the work that you do?
We can see that right now we are moving from analogic buildings to digital buildings, and in the near future we can call the autonomous buildings. It means that with data, we can, so all the equipments have a lot of sensors, right? We can extract the data from those sensors and not only predict any fail of those equipments, ensure that those equipments will run at their optimal points, and also set, I would say, what-if scenarios. Is almost a digital twin of the building, right? So we can simulate what will happen with this building, depends on the cooling demands, depend on the weather, depend if there is any equipment on maintenance, depends on the cost of the energy. With all this information, we can send the data to the clouds, and the clouds, the AI can support to define what's the optimum point to run the HVAC system, for example, or the heating system. So we can see that we already have some cases with that, and only with this technology, without replace equipment, we can see some buildings with more than 30% of energy savings.
Wow. I mean, I was with a colleague of yours at the London Climate Action Week, and one of the stats she gave us was by 2030, AI and data centers can actually provide 10% of Europe's heat demand by the wasted heat that is being produced. So again, like not just in systems, but the things that you can do as JCI, and it's absolutely amazing. Just to keep to that thought in terms of how AI can help accelerate growth, I'm going to turn to you, Sam, to talk about how it can accelerate clean transition as opposed to be a blocker in any way.
Thanks, Wafa. And I think there's a number of ways it can accelerate the green transition, I think. One of them is actually in driving some of the renewables in the first place. So if you look around the world at the moment, PPA growth is primarily driven by the tech companies right now. There's not a lot of governments with a lot of money, so they're kind of reliant. They can't all do CFDs like you have in my country. So actually, the hope is that a little bit of the sort of AI green growth and some of the usage actually turns into a useful pool in terms of driving forward a bunch of projects. I think you're seeing that with some of the stuff you guys are doing, not just on renewables, but in terms of CCUS and even SMRs. Good luck with that one. But I think the general driving of productivity is something we haven't touched upon. Just briefly is. We see a big opportunity for all of this in terms of predictive maintenance. You're beginning to start doing asset inspections across our networks and transmission. You're starting to try and do predictive work in our power stations. And for me, to Mike's initial provoker at the beginning, the extra load that AI and data centers will put on, I think gets dwarfed by a bunch of those benefits as you start to roll out the predictive, the energy efficiency and other things. And we're only scratching the surface, but we're beginning to see some improvements in my company alone.
No, that's brilliant. I mean, one of the things that we did find from the research that we did is that about 85+% of the executives believe that AI will be embedded in all of the companies in order to drive, like you say, the energy transition as well. So I'm going to turn to you, Will, to talk a little bit about the capital. So what do you from your point of view, what will unlock more capital in order to enable a cleaner transition for AI?
Well, firstly, to echo the comments of my fellow panelists, I think we do see it as a huge opportunity, but it is really about ensuring that additional power demand is met by clean energy. And there are a few challenges in doing that. If we look just at the US, for example, there have been a very large number of speculative applications for grid connections by data centers and by projects seeking to supply those data centers. And the actual build-out is something like 10 to 20% of those speculative applications. So purely from a electricity grid perspective and planning, and all of the transmission investment that we need to deliver clean energy rather than fossil-generated energy, that is all challenged by significant uncertainty in that pipeline and exactly where that will look. The other key blocker is challenges really in delivering both the data centers but also the clean energy power where there is local opposition. So coming back to a planning question, we see again in the US, roughly $65 billion of data center investment is currently stalled due to local opposition, and that includes local health concerns related to the on-site provision of power set out by those projects. So we see a few ways to resolve some of those challenges. First, we need regulatory models to become more agile. And actually, I don't think that's necessarily asking regulators to favor clean energy over other forms of energy, because actually what we know is that clean energy is faster to build, it's often cheaper, and it is exactly the sort of power that data centers want. And that's why clean energy stocks this year have grown 50% in market value versus MSCI World Index of only 20%. And that includes fuel cell on-site generation. So we need that agile response from regulators. Helping that can be more direct engagement between projects, their financial partners, and those regulators, so that we can resolve some of these challenges with speculative pipelines. And the UK is a good example where that engagement is now much stronger, thanks to National Grid and SSE playing a strong role in moving away from having a grid connection pipeline that is first come, first serve, and actually changing it to be merit-based and which projects are strongest. The other point to resolve the community concerns with provision of new power, including renewables, to data centers is that community engagement piece. So we need to be more structured, we need to go earlier with that, and we also need to better explain the case for local consumers. One of the concerns with data centers is that they will require significant transmission capacity, and current regulatory models share that investment across consumer bills, including those paid by data centers, but not solely by data centers. So there is an affordability concern that utilities in regulated markets meeting data center demand will pass on those costs not only to data centers but also to consumers, and that immediately and directly risks the execution of those projects through that local opposition.
No, thank you for that. I'm going to pick up on your point on grid before I hand over to Mike to offer his thoughts as well. We've kind of started a saying, which is the most expensive grid is a late grid, right? Because you can't do a counterfactual on this. You can't do anything else. So it is, the grid seems to be the biggest problem. And when we were doing our survey, it was also highlighted that about 1/3 of the execs across the globe who are investing in data centers believe grid to be a bigger problem than the supply chain and everything else in order to deliver the renewable energy. So that keeps coming up as a massive issue across the board. And Mike, would love your thoughts on that, because I know you feel very passionately about it as well.
Yes, Wafa, I do. In COP28 in Dubai, you'll all recall the big announcement, the global ambition to treble renewable energy. Fantastic announcement. This was, now just to be very clear in timing terms, this was before the AI revolution. We were very clear, Wafa and KPMG, and we wrote a report, we're saying it is not going to happen. And we were reflecting what we see on the ground with developers who are trying to build renewables. And you know this, Sonia and Sam, you know it. And we spoke about lots of different issues. We picked up on supply chain, we picked up on capital markets, permitting, all of those issues, and bang in the middle of them was grid. Now, move forward, we now have even greater energy demand. We should recognize all of the positive things that are happening. I mean, like, I'm very proud of the renewable energy industry. And I was there, as you know, Wafa, at the very beginning. And to see where it is today is brilliant. But it's not good enough. It is not good enough, I'm afraid, because if we're serious about the Paris Agreement, if we're serious about 1.5 degrees, where we are today will not get us there. And we are very clear about this in KPMG, and when we talk to our corporate clients, we are now into a disorderly transition. What that means, to be very clear, is real business disruption. It's going to affect supply chains. It's going to affect your own operations. And I'm saying this particularly to the renewable participants here. The corporate sector actually wants to be at the table, wants to solve the problem of scaling renewables. And at the center of this problem is, back to your question, Wafa, is the grid issue. Now, there are lots of great things happening here at COP, and I'm sure we will spend many weeks and months debating, was this a good COP or was it a bad COP? And I've got my own personal reflections on it. I am disappointed, however, at the lack of attention, and maybe Sonia or others that you've seen more than I have, but I have not seen enough attention to grids and probably storage as well, if I'm being honest. And if anything, we're looking at some of the newer solutions, which we do need to look at, but we need to double down on the importance of renewable energy in helping us to cut emissions. And I think we've lost sight of that. We said, oh, we've got renewables sorted. We've done great work, but it is still our number one solution, and I think there's a lot more to go. The grid issue, I'm going to be honest, I'm not quite sure what the problem is, and I'd love to know. Is it a lack of willingness from governments? Is it a lack of funding? Because I believe the private investment market is prepared to play. Is it and Sam, I'm sure you'll have a perspective on this. And can I just as well, Waf, just maybe try to link it to some of the other developments here at COP. One of the single biggest themes that's been discussed is this concept of investable indices, particularly in the context of emerging markets. And it's a brilliant concept, and we in KPMG we're working with some global bodies like UNDP very much to bring the global investor and the global developer lens to the development of these NDCs. But at the core of that, when we look at the NDCs, renewables growth is a very, very significant part of all of that. And we need to work with governments to bring in those policies, particularly around grid, that's going to help scale renewables. So can I just make one final comment, actually, just as I'm here? I was invited yesterday to attend a session by SSE and the Smith School of Economics in Oxford University. And Sam, we find a way to distribute the report. It was to launch a report, and we did a panel on the macro and social economic benefits of renewable energy investment in emerging markets. The figures were absolutely staggering, and it's a very well-researched, peer-reviewed piece of work that's well worth reading. And I made one comment, Sam, about this report. What I said is, this is a message to governments in emerging markets. This is a roadmap to economic development, to growth in GDP, but you think you're competing with the global north. Sometimes you're competing with other countries. You figure out the policy, make it work for the developers and the investors who are prepared to play.
No, thank you for that. I mean, I'm going to ask Sam to come in before Sonia, especially on the grid issue.
Yeah, and another good provocation from Mike. Just my perspective on the grid issue. There's a transmission issue and a distribution issue. Transmission of the motorways, distribution of the smaller wires to your home. The transmission issue has been that governments around the world have been obsessed with the generation side and haven't plotted the transmission parts on the map. The UK woke up to this about 3 years ago, probably about 7 years too late. And started to draw the transmission lines on a map so that we can get on, design a network around it, to have a fast regulatory framework and start to build that out. And I think that's probably the same rule book for transmission everywhere. You need a plan. On distribution, in most of the countries I have any knowledge of, most of them are run on a just-in-time basis. So you effectively have these kind of people apply for connections, then the distribution bid catches up. What we're hoping to get through the next regulatory settlement in the UK, and I've seen other countries starting to think about this as well, is trying to get investment ahead of need, strategic investment, whatever you want it is, whatever you want to call it, and actually try and get the investment and the load so that the grid is ready to absorb it rather than perpetually playing catch up. And then probably the last thing I would say, which I think is really interesting on the funding, Mike, is we did a capital raise earlier this week, and we were really oversubscribed because the part of our investment was in grid, and the world is beginning to realise you need it. One of the areas where grid suffers in the developing world is it isn't always categorised as a kind of clean investment in the same way that renewables are. So some of the work we've been doing with UNESA this week is around trying to work with the development banks and others to kind of create proper frameworks so that grid is appropriately valued as being a sort of necessary climate finance eligible piece. So we are playing catch up. I don't like it, but we're trying.
No, thank you for that. And I really like the distinction that you've made between transmission and distribution, because what you're then saying is there is that tension between centralized versus decentralized generation. And unless you take that holistic approach, you will always be at odds. You can keep investing in transmission, but you're not going to get there unless you have that in distribution as well. Sonia?
So I just want to say that as the Global Renewables Alliance, as all the renewables technologies, our number one priority this COP, you guessed it, it's implementation of the grids and storage target that was agreed by many countries at COP29 Baku. And just to remind you, that's a doubling of investment in grid worldwide by the end of the decade, which should translate into 25 million kilometers of new grid infrastructure worldwide and 65 million by 2040, and getting to 1.5 terawatts of total installed capacity of storage, all types of storage, again by 2030. We are delighted that yesterday there was a ministerial on this, with a bunch of new countries and a bunch of new institutions signing up to this target. We are pushing for a global institution to be given the mandate to really deliver that into the long term. And we absolutely see this as the priority. Why are grids not struggling to keep up? Of course, they're a natural monopoly. Traditionally, sort of a public-private, but with a large share of public involvement in the investment. The multilateral development banks are actually doing a fairly good job at trying to channel money into grids, transmission and distribution. So thanks to the work that you referenced, about 25% of the energy finance that the multilateral development banks deliver is now grid investments. I think in developing countries, the truth is the grids are owned by utilities that are completely bankrupt. That's delivering, a high number of power cuts, which means that people are just taking power, things into their own hands and just putting solar panels on their roof. We need electricity market design in order to manage these grids better. We need loads of storage with grid-forming inverters on it in order to provide services to the grid, to provide the grid stability that is needed. We need AI to manage this 1950s infrastructure in a new modern way and not in a 1950s way. And we need to be creative. In some countries, we may need to put battery storage or synchronous condensers, machines that pretend to be a piece of grid. I don't know. You explain synchronous condensers, but we need to put battery storage or synchronous condensers on the system where it is weakest in order to strengthen it. If we're unable to build the grid infrastructure we need.
Thank you for that. I mean, you've touched on storage and reliability, so I'm going to ask Diana to come back in to talk about how AI can improve grid flexibility, efficiency, and also use the data to actually help us forecast better in terms of whether it's in trading, whether it's in demand management, so on and so forth.
Before I answer that, I just want to touch a little bit about kind of the partnership that we see specifically in the U.S. context in terms of enabling visibility, especially from the point of the hyperscaler alongside the utilities to be able to anticipate what actual demand will arrive. And kind of to your point in terms of the more speculative investment, showcasing, and we've done a lot of this in collaboration with a lot of the other hyperscalers in the US so that the grid can prepare and have a more accurate picture of what the demand will actually look like. And when we make a commitment, showcasing that the demand will actually come because it's a long-term investment. To grid reliability and kind of what we're seeing, I think there are a lot of tools that we've leveraged and that utilities who are customers of ours or customers of other hyperscalers are already leveraging a lot of the efficiencies and kind of technology, whether it's grid enhancing technologies or others, to really optimize the grid as it exists today. And to your point about the grid from the 1950s, certainly we're seeing wide-scale underinvestment of the grid that we have in the U.S., a long-term effort, at least in the U.S. domestically, to push for kind of transmission reform as well as permitting reform in order to enable additional capacity to be brought online. And that's something that we collectively as an industry are pushing within the U.S. and elsewhere.
No, thank you for that. And just on that, Zhao, would you want to add anything to it in terms of what you're seeing there?
Yeah, I would like to add that we are talking about grid, for sure, it's very important, but and renewable energy is also it's key to this energy transition. But we have something that maybe is cheaper to deploy, that's energy efficiency. With energy efficiency, we can reduce, the demand and the power, and it's It's here. There are a lot of technologies that are already available that's cheaper, and from the capex perspective, should enable better this transition.
The cheapest energy is the one that is not used or saved, right? And the cheapest carbon is the one that you don't emit. So I completely agree with you on that. And on that, what are you actually seeing people do with regards to energy efficiency and trying and enabling that through AI? Are there any examples you can share?
For sure, yeah. So, you know that buildings right now, we spend 80% of our time at buildings, right? I would say that commercial buildings or public buildings or even data centers should represent, I don't know, maybe 30%, 25% of the total energy consumption. Those buildings right now, as I already mentioned, they are moving to autonomous building, where they are trying to creating scenarios. They are trying to simulate those scenarios, and from those simulations, identify the right points or the right to cover the thermal loads or to cover the electricity loads. They are trying to identify the optimum point with the lower energy consumption and so the lower emissions. From the thermal power plants, what we can see, they are also already applying the AI, trying to maximize the energy recovery, the heat energy recovery, and also to reduce the combustion from the process to generate power.
No, those are really brilliant examples, and thank you for sharing that. Will, I'm going to turn to you now in terms of, what can investors and policymakers do in terms of collaboration to ensure that AI demand drives cleaner rather than the fossil fuel energy that we've been talking about?
Yeah, happy to. So I mentioned that regulatory reform, having a more agile grid, and I think that's certainly important and good to hear that AWS are fostering that partnership already. I also want to touch on where there is already new gas generation coming online, because there is a minority of new power for data centers that is from gas. There's also an important piece for investors and policymakers to address, which is the methane efficiency of that gas. And there is a global methane pledge that came out of COP26, looking for a 30% reduction in global methane emissions by 2030. And of course, this is absolutely critical. And to maintain license to grow in this sector, as investors, we really see an importance in engaging the whole tech ecosystem around this. And actually, it's really a full circle moment, because AI is also the solution to closing lots of the methane leakage gaps in gas supply and upstream production. So we see that as an exciting opportunity. And one of the questions we're posing our portfolio companies and our data centers is exactly how they're thinking about procuring low methane emissions gas. It's always, in our view, the next best option after direct procurement of clean energy. Yeah. And in fact, I don't see a strong case for additional gas generation capacity to be going through FID today because of the reasons I mentioned with clean energy. But where projects are already going through with that infrastructure in place, it's certainly a powerful area of focus.
No, I completely agree. I think the world, and the data that we're seeing from 2024 is you're back on coal because you haven't invested in methane as much as you could have in order to have lower emissions. I was at ADIPEC last year, and methane and the fugitive emissions associated with methane was one of the key aspects that was talked about. To say that we've let go of low-hanging fruit in order to go for renewables, in order to do other things, and what that has led to is more emissions across the globe. So that's something we do need to address. I'm just going to pause here because we have some amazing audience contributors as well, and I'm going to try and follow instruction and not take the mic across the speaker, but I am going to invite Rick to offer his views. Do you want to come over here as opposed to, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, thank you, Wafa, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is great to be a part of this group and this discussion. My name is Rick Ziegler. I work for a company called UL Solutions. As their director for trade and multilateral affairs. I also serve with a different hat. I serve as the OECD's industry chair for consumer policy. And I'll start with the latter just for a moment. In OECD and other international fora, including APEC, we're seeing a rise of the AI conversation just about across the board. I mean, it wouldn't take you long to find another AI-centered session if you were to walk through these hallways. So it's top of mind for everyone, what it can do, what it can't do, and where the hurdles are. With UL Solutions, and I think a few of you, including Will, with just touching on consumer buy-in, and a few others have touched on or implied something that I think we take for granted sometimes, which is underlying safety, a foundation of trust. And we're seeing that pop up in the AI conversation across the board. So with UL Solutions, you may have recall the acronym just UL, or Underwriters Laboratories. We're now UL Solutions. And for 130 years, we've been testing and certifying products, industrial and consumer, and ensuring safety and trust with our mark. And so a natural extension of that safety mission is also sustainability. And I would argue now getting into ensuring safety of digital products. And so I'm super proud to announce that a couple of weeks ago, we released a framework for testing and certifying AI-enabled and AI-based products to make sure that we have transparency and cybersecurity. And with that, you know, our belief, and I think this goes without saying, but you cannot have innovation without trust. You cannot have innovation without safety. And I think it's really at the foundation of our work here. I will also say that we're seeing, I think, you've mentioned a few of these products, and I'd be interested in hearing more, but we're seeing sort of this rise of this idea of AI in the grid at large, but it's also at the product-based level. You mentioned, I think, a specific type of technology, which I was not familiar with, but I'd also mention that we're seeing not just smart buildings, we're not just seeing the rise of a smarter grid, more optimized grid, but we're also seeing the rise of the individual products in those grids, including smart inverters, to change DC solar power over into AC current, which is in these walls. So I think we have a long way to go. I guess I would leave with one question that I would really like the panel to consider, and this has been hinted at, but are we, honestly speaking, in some kind of a J curve? Look, there's a lot of doubts. I think it was one of the first things Will said was there's doubt on the AI horizon as it pertains to the energy transition. I know we're not going to go in a linear path. We never do. Everybody wants us to. You know, you want to step back and you want to say the AI is safe, the energy transition, it's on its way, and we're going to meet all the goals that we said we would for finance and investment. But I think we have to admit that it's a nonlinear path, and I would be interested in terms of what are the milestones in that nonlinear path that you see in the next 5 to 10 years. It might be we don't have a chance to talk about that, but if they wanted to, I would love to hear. Thank you.
That's a brilliant question. Anybody wants to come in on that? Mike?
Yeah, no, I think a pretty important question. The short and simple answer is I don't know, okay? But I think there's one other dimension we don't talk about enough that I think will influence this agenda in a major way, and that is a question of affordability. If we're into a scenario where we've got this exponential demand and we're not able to meet the supply, which is very obvious, we've discussed the challenges here, this is not a data center issue. This becomes a public good issue because the consumer, the voting public are the people who are going to be faced with higher energy bills. And that's simple economics when you know, and we're seeing this exponential demand. That for me is going to be a bit of a tipping point. And already I am seeing governments figure out something else as well. They're figuring out that if they're going to attract AI investment into their particular country, they need to get their policy right, but in particular, they need to be able to deliver energy, and preferably green energy. I've seen Saudi Arabia being very clear, trying to sell Saudi Arabia as a location for data centers. Clearly, it's got the solar power, and the fact that it can say we're able to deliver the energy, while countries where I live and in other parts of the world were failing miserably. And that's why this is becoming a pretty significant issue, not just in the context of data centers. This ultimately is about the energy industry.
Can I just jump in on that? And given that we're here in Brazil, Brazil has made a big effort in terms of creating itself as a hub for data centers, developing a data center attraction scheme that is currently in draft form, but really highlighting the high intensity of renewables that are in the Brazilian grid, and also driving data centers to kind of ensure that the energy that they utilize, it comes from renewables, driving efficiency and meeting strong benchmarks. And we are seeing that from a number of countries as well, as they're looking to attract data centers.
No, I think that's fair. Anybody else wants to come in? Yeah, Will?
Just very quickly on the way that we can help protect consumers and isolate some of this demand-supply gap from affecting consumers. We've just put out a paper, but others have as well, including the Natural Resource Defense Council in the US, making recommendations to policymakers around where there are large pipelines of data centers being built, establishing really clear contracts between those data centers and their utilities and their power providers, so that if they do cancel that build out, there are cancellation charges that are sufficiently representative of the risk that those utilities are taking in building that supply, so that the utilities can build with conviction. And also, like I alluded to earlier, taking on and bearing more of those transmission costs. We see in our tech companies that the value creation opportunity is, of course, huge from AI. And there is that willingness to pay a premium, unlike in other segments, to ensure the delivery of data centers. And we think that's a key piece that does actually work for both sides.
So it's almost a carrot and stick approach to ensure delivery, right? And I'm going to pick up on that and answer your question a little bit directly, because you're asking about milestones. I personally find that being here at COP and you know, the work that we do globally, the gap between ambition and delivery is just increasing, right? And everybody, even in our survey, everybody was super positive about there being green energy and them wanting to sign up to green energy. But when we asked them, is that a non-negotiable? Turns out it's not. I mean, it's only non-negotiable for, I think, less than 20% of organizations. So that it's not a measurable milestone, but I do think the key milestone here would be when we start to close that gap through collaboration, whether it's with transmission and distribution, whether it is what you've talked about in terms of what's happening in Brazil and in other countries, when we are able to close that gap. Any other thoughts, Sonia? Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think what you said from UL, Rick, was really interesting. And I really think that, yes, we need people who have systems levels perspectives, like KPMG and others, to come in and help grid operators not just manage, figure out how to use AI to manage the kind of the overall system, but also to manage the interface with all the devices on the grid that are operating with advanced technologies and AI and so on. In the defense industry, there are now very tailored software providers that are providing AI software to manage the AI integrated in the different drone manufacturers and the different kit on the grid, the interaction with the traditional tanks and fighter jets and ships and so on. We kind of need that for the energy system. We need to transfer that across to the energy system. And then I just want to say a word on adaptation and resilience, right? Because there are two goals of what? There are three goals of the Paris Agreement, actually, but let's focus on the first two. The first one being mitigation 1.5 to 2 degrees, the second one being adaptation and resilience. Adaptation and resilience is going to be absolutely critical to every major, corporate around the world, every major grid operator, every major, every single community and household around the world. And so we really need to be thinking, how can we harness this new technology to deliver adaptation and resilience? On our side, we're very much looking into, should we recommend that every single solar and battery storage system installed from now on should have the capacity to be able to go offline into island mode, to disconnect itself from the grid, so that in the worst case scenario, if there's a hurricane or a storm or a flood or whatever it might be, that building can keep going and keep the air conditioning on, right? Because God knows, I think you're probably all feeling it, we were really going to need good and sustainable and efficient cooling into the next few decades in order to survive this heat. And all of you look very shiny, and so I'm sure you all agree with me.
No, thank you. Sam, did you want to go next? And I'll come on to you, Diana.
Just very briefly, it's a great question on that measurement thing. I was thinking about how I could measure in my head, and probably maybe 2 years ago, if we'd been having a form of this conversation, we'd be talking about the biggest innovation we'd have been doing would have been like our chat bot on, doing a bit of stuff with our customer services. Well, now you've actually started to get some predictive maintenance tools going. We've got stuff that's literally running down our transmission lines, looking at fault detection. I think the interesting thing really is that IEA report we saw, which had some pretty big numbers for stuff for 2030, 2035. It's a lot of work to get there, but that's probably the really interesting stepping point where you sit there, and your KPMG one, sorry, Wafa, as well, and we sit there and go, did we get near this? Now, in a lot of things in energy, we've tended to outperform them, e.g. solar costs and a bunch of other things, and let's hope it's the same case there, but we should be measuring this.
Diana?
So I just wanted to jump in on cooling. I know that it is not a topic of the conversation, but did want to talk about water and how AI is enabling water, and thinking about cooling and thinking about being in a space like this and imagining how hot a data center is. I just wanted to showcase a couple of things. One, a partnership that we launched recently with the Water Environment Federation, Penn University, and water utilities of the world. To build something that we call the Water and AI Center of Excellence that has two goals. One, to showcase use cases of AI for water management, water utilization, water benefits that can be delivered by utilities or others who are managing their own water usage. And then two, to share best practices about how data centers can use water. Certainly, you can cool a data center by using air conditioning. It is very expensive. It has high energy costs associated with that, or you can use water in a number of different forms. Generally, we use it, at least in the US context, direct evaporative cooling, which does not use water 365 days of the year. It is in a closed loop. We can use the ambient air many times, but there's a second life to that water, where part of our water positive strategy is to use recycled water where available. We're planning to scale that to 120 locations globally by the end of the decade. And there's also investments in kind of water restoration in the local basins where we operate, and also developing a second life to that water, where if we can co-locate by, for example, and if we've had some experience in using that water that's used through the cycling and bringing that back for agricultural or irrigation purposes, and that's another way that we can responsibly use that. So I think that partnership and thinking through ways that kind of AI can solve both challenges.
No, I think the point on climate adaptation and the biodiversity one is a really interesting one. Mike, did you want to come in?
Yes. Can I focus on the water issue in particular? So we talk a lot about the electricity. I think you mentioned the waste heat aspects earlier. Now, I'm going to take a step back. In our world in KPMG, as we think about the climate and the energy transition challenges in front of us, what I mentioned earlier that I didn't feel grids was discussed enough at COP. I have an even stronger view that innovation as a topic and a theme is not discussed at COP to the degree it should be. And one of the things that I've noticed and that I really like about what's happening with data centers, it is spurring on new innovation. There's some quite incredible things happening, and I know all of the hyperscalers are really driving this, and I think this is one of the big unspoken positives. But what we really try to do in KPMG, yes, we work with big commercial clients, but we also work with the innovation community because these are the people who will make a difference. And Diana, one of the, I don't know if you mentioned ambient air, which what triggered a point. So one of the innovations that we're working on at the moment is a new technology called air to water. I don't know if you've heard of this, but this is literally a very simple turbine, and there's a number of variations of this across the world, which you power it with electricity, and it is capable of producing water from the air, clean water. And now it's got multiple uses because water is up there with carbon is a big issue. The number one use is data centers. So all I'm saying is watch this space. It's and you can look it up. It's called air to water technology, and everybody thinks there's a water crisis. The innovators behind this say there is no water crisis. There's a harvesting crisis. You need to figure out how to harvest the ambient air. But for me, this is where huge economic and social need is driving differentiating innovation. So hopefully, if we're here in 12 months' time, this will be a bit more advanced.
No, thank you for that. I'm going to pause there again to see if our other contributors from the audience are present. Wanted to see if Renee from E.ON is here. Sorry, did you want to?
Hello, everybody. I'm Neumara Arbex. I'm from KPMG. I lead this sustainability and ESG for Brazil and Latin America in connection with America's operations of us. So I was listening to you, and of course, I have been in this field for over 20 years. So I have been in this discussion of, like Mike a little bit, right, Mike? We have been discussing energy transition for very long. I'm still missing much more conversations about how we're going to use less oil and not only increase renewables. This seems to be the topic here. We're still kind of feeling we should not be talking about reducing oil as in the past. We should be. But in terms of data centers and AI, I just want to put on the table a few conversations that I have been participating in. First of all, I have been lived in the Netherlands for over 10 years. So they put the data centers in the middle of the greenhouse complexes and connect the whole thing. So every year there is a fair where they explain those new technologies to make data centers integrated in many different parts of their economy and production systems so that they do not become a problem. And they have been doing this for at least 10 years, maybe more. Some of them are energy positive, the whole system. So one of the things that I have learned is not only about following innovation, but also thinking about solutions in integrating different systems that maybe alone, isolated, would not be interesting enough for everything we want to do. So I would like to ask you to comment on that. The second very interesting conversation I have been participating, because now I am kind of getting some time to talk about new technologies for the transition, and start going around with lots of scientists. I'm a scientist myself. And one of the ideas that I have heard is that instead of transmitting energy, this is a big problem in Brazil. I'm Brazilian, so we have lots of renewable energy in the north, and we cannot distribute to all areas we need. So we are all the time just to connect them from the grid. And we have blackouts throughout the country because most of our electricity, as you know, comes from renewables, particularly hydro, 82%. So we have done this homework. This is not our problem. Our problem in this is probably adaptation and transmission. So I was talking to the scientists, and they were saying, one smart way to transfer energy is transferring data. So, because to produce data, to, analyze and do everything we do with data, we use lots of energy. But if you could do all that where energy is already available and then you transfer only the knowledge you get, it's a much smarter way to deal with the problem. So that was my contribution to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sam, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, just a starting thought stimulated by your point. I think that integration with other, which kind of builds on Mike's point, is a really interesting one. There's actually your business, Amazon, for example. I know in Dublin you've been using the waste heat to kind of power a data center by a university. People like you guys are starting to put some of this together. One of the things I've been thinking about a bit is obviously there's the optimal location of data centers, and in the UK we have these kind of AI growth zones, which they're sort of slightly struggling with at the moment. But I think in those you have the opportunity, when you start to have countries with spatial plans, to start thinking about where the best locations for these are, e.g. where it works for water, where it works for telecoms, where it works for energy, and starting to put these together and then use some of the weirder system tools that all of our energy industries and governments have, e.g. whether it's demand credits or different offsets or, exemptions from certain charges, to start to put together a bit more of a package that starts to allow the optimal location and then starts to force some integration through it. So that was what, when you were talking, that's what some of the stimulating in my head. And I think we're only just getting started in that, if I'm honest.
No, thank you for that. Mike, did you want to come in?
I think Sam has answered it.
Oh, okay, fine. Well done then. Any other contributions or questions from the audience? Yeah, go on.
Just a real quick one. I would echo. Is this better? Sorry, I'm echoing. I wanted just to amplify what Mike just pointed out, I think a couple rounds ago, this idea of maybe seeing some more discussions focused on innovation. I really like that idea a lot. I mean, I think, I don't know if it's the philosophy or the psychology of, sometimes I feel like we could dive into that, I think, and bring the innovators here. I know there are some good sessions out there where we've seen it and you walk around it and there are examples, don't get me wrong, but we could see more of it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anybody wants to come in on a comment?
I've suggested to Australia, not yet to Turkey, that for COP31 it should be the Innovation COP.
Should be the Innovation COP, no? Fair point. Sonny?
We've suggested it should be the COP that delivers 300 million solar and storage homes around the world. What have you guys suggested to the Aussies?
Anybody else wants to answer that, or?
Just one comment, and also stimulated by the gentleman in the front's great T-shirt saying "Don't procrastinate." On some of this, we've got to pick up the pace on driving renewables at the moment. Just as a renewables investor, if we're sitting there thinking about how we meet this extra data center demand and how we meet some of the challenges as we want to do at the moment, we do a lot in offshore wind, and I know that offshore wind will be in the center of a number of economies' energy solutions. But right now, to the point Mike made at the beginning, it's really tough out there to get some of these projects away, and it's a really, it almost feels like there's a kind of hump for some of these bigger, large, capitally intensive projects, which are going to be essential to get the transition going further. And it feels to me, we're right on pushing at the headline level, but on the ground, one of the differences I felt this year compared to if I'd been talking to people last year is offshore wind is bloody hard to get away right now if you don't have a CFD. And there's something around, while we talk about this debate, which is really important, we've almost slightly taken for granted some of the driving renewables debates, which is literally going to be at the center of how we do it. And if I'm sitting there thinking about the conversation I want to have next year, hopefully we've done a lot of progress on it by then, it is how can we actually just keep that bulk, low carbon electrons driving through the system? Because that is the bit that is actually slowing down at the moment.
It's the delivery, right? It's the delivery that we have to kind of continue with, as opposed to the growth plans that we used to have. And that's what, the previous COPs have pushed for. Now it's really about delivering. Sonia, and then yourself, João Paulo.
I think we've really got to divide up the world into, the OECD Western markets where offshore wind is absolutely critical. And we do, as the solar industry, we need offshore wind in those markets. To the global south, the non-OECD, least developed countries, the countries where resilience is the most of a problem, where we've got to think small. Right? I'm just not sure offshore wind is going to work in those countries. I was in a meeting yesterday where the Somalis were asking the African Development Bank to look at offshore wind in Somalia. And they said, look, the room just said, look, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. Look at what happened in Pakistan. Within 12 months, so there was a spike in electricity prices, there was a spike in diesel prices, there were no import taxes on solar coming into the country. Pakistan imported 50 gigawatts of solar in about a year and a half, changing the electricity mix so that suddenly almost from 0 to 20% of Pakistan's power now comes from small-scale residential rooftop solar PV and storage. There are people in Pakistan, like a single mum in Karachi called Farida Salim, who are scraping together $600 by selling her gold just to put solar on her roof and battery storage in her front room so she can power her fan to survive the 45-degree summers. The renewables revolution is taking off exponentially. It's taking off because people in Karachi, people in Lagos, people in Manila, and of course in China are installing this stuff like no tomorrow. And we, as solar, we are on track, both distributed and utility scale, for being the dominant mainstream power source by 2033. We're here at 10 years of the Paris Agreement. By the time the 20th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, the world's going to be pretty well solarized, and it's small-scale stuff, right? And I think utilities like SSE and the ones that you advise at KPMG need to be thinking how they can get in on that act. How can they become the third-party leases that, rent the roof from the homeowner, put the solar on it, put the storage on it, and then make some money out of this, so it's not just local installers, a man in a van delivering this with questionable consumer codes. I think Amazon needs to be putting it at the top of their Black Friday deals. You're from Amazon, right? Yeah. Putting at the top of their Black Friday deals, buy your solar and storage here, which you can do in India. You can buy your solar and storage on Amazon, and it comes with an installer as well, which is amazing. We need to be, the big guys need to be thinking how they can get on in on the act on the small scale stuff. Because that's where the growth is. That's where the action is. That's where the money is over the next 10 years,
Thank you for that. João Paulo?
Yeah, I will try to make some topics, answer parts of her question regarding the technologies are right available for data centers. Indeed, at the Data Center Dynamics that was 2 weeks ago in São Paulo, we showcased part of this innovation. Answering your question, what should be in the next COP? I guess that's we can join solar energy with energy efficiency. And I try to cover parts of what the data centers, the hyperscale data centers are doing right now. So we can, so Mike mentioned about geothermal. We also can see some topics regarding the SMR, these small modular reactors. But I don't think that both of those technologies are already mature to be deployed. What we can see that Amazon and other hyperscale data centers are using is free cooling and liquid cooling. Free cooling is when you can get the fresh air in fresh zones and also fresh water if it's available, trying to reduce or turn off the compressors, and with that we can reduce the energy consumption. And reminds the concept of air conditioning. Air conditioning is not to cool the air. Air conditioning is to remove the heat, right? So data centers, the heat are coming from the servers, the ships, right? The other technology that a lot of the hyperscale data centers is already buying and deploying is the liquid cooling. Is instead of cooling the air, that we have an attrition, the specific heat of the air, then remove the heat of the servers, the racks, we can, the cooling water is cooling direct the chips. So we are not cooling, or we're not removing the heat from the air, we are removing the heat from the chips. The efficiency of these technologies may be 50% higher than a standard air conditioning system. It can bring, that most of the data centers, the KPI for the efficiency of data centers, the PUE, power use effectiveness, right? So using liquid cooling can reduce the PUE from 1.5 to 1.2.
No, that's really helpful, and we always come back to energy efficiency, right? And yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Just gonna try and close us off here. So I have one question for all of the panelists, and I'm gonna borrow a little bit from Rick on this as well. Fast forward to COP 35. What do you think needs to happen to prove that AI is a positive catalyst for the energy transition and for climate action? I'm gonna go from my left here. So Shuzhao, I'll start with you.
From my perspective, you know that I'm covering Latam. What I think we need is more investments, more capital. So we can see that there are a lot of customers that right now are trying to pursue and improving their sustainability KPIs. But some of them, they know what to do, but they don't have enough capital to enable this transition.
So that's really helpful because it's action on actual capital investment and delivery. Great. Diana?
Great. I think in 10 years' time, we will have made significant progress in how we build, how we power, and how we cool, driving down additional efficiencies in those. But the conversation will have shifted to not just in silos what AI can enable, but a full ecosystem built around supporting and actually deploying the solutions at scale. And I think that's what we need to move to over the coming years, sharing the stories of what is already working, what is in process, so it can be broadly adopted.
So it's innovation to deliver an ecosystem. Love that. Sam?
Yeah, I think we just need to keep advancing the use cases. We need to keep turning them from PowerPoints into practical applications, which is beginning to happen. I'm beginning to see that in my business. And I think one of my takeaways was probably one of your points earlier, Derek. I think it's around we need to start measuring it. You know, I was rereading the IEA report on the way over here on AI and getting very excited about all the, you know, you do this and you can cut the equivalent to the demand of Brazil and you do this and X, Y, and Z. But we need to actually realize those. I personally think we will, and I think we'll end up over-realizing them. But I think we should be tracking ourselves, and I think we should be discussing and tracking what we can and what we are doing as a sector on this, because the potential is huge, but we need to actually realize it.
So it's about measuring and also showcasing or learning from our failures, showcasing the success, but learning from the failures. Will?
I think the measure of success will ultimately be if we've concretely closed the temperature gap to the Paris Agreement in 2035. I think AI is one of the only positive drivers of closing that gap now, and it will be difficult to, from an attribution perspective, to lean on that, but I think that will be one of the biggest measures of success, and that will be underpinned by the delivery. And we've been summarizing this COP as being about mobilization, scaling, and partnerships. And from this panel, we know that partnerships will be key.
Are a massive thing. Yep, completely agree with you on that. Diana?
Very simple message for Global South and Global North. Choose AI, avoid blackouts.
What?
Avoid blackouts.
Great. Very simple, very punchy. Mike?
So for me, the expression I use, Wafa, is AI everywhere. And what I mean by that is I hope well before COP35 we will get all stakeholders to understand the way AI can transform business, but in particular address the mitigation, adaptation, circularity and nature challenges. A lot of those, we're learning all the time, but a lot of those solutions are there today. The problem is not enough people believe in the power. I think we just need to keep sending that message.
Well, there you have it, folks. I mean, it's been a great session. I just want to say a massive thank you for everyone for being here and for contributing. So a big round of applause for our panelists.